Hey everybody, this is Josh,
And this is Dean.
and here we are again with another episode of Finding an Agent. So we're going to start off talking about any updates on Dean's agent search. Dean, what's been going on?
Well, I had a lot going on at my day job this week. So as a result, I didn't get a lot done. Essentially, what I worked on was since my novel is science fiction and it's set in about 2060, I was never too clear in the novel about how this world came to be. And so I started going back and working on a history of the novel, from 2020 to 2060. In other words, how this world came to be over the past the 40 years into the future. And I worked through that. I had some pretty good success on that. And now I'm evaluating whether I want to make some changes to some scenes or add some scenes based on that history into the novel. As far as agent search itself, unfortunately, I just did not get a lot accomplished this week because of things being so crazy at work.
Did you get any more replies from any agents?
I did not get any replies from agents. I think I've only gotten 4 or 5, so there's still 15 to 20 outstanding that I just haven't heard anything on.
Gotcha. All right. Well, for my week, I worked on my initial agent search for the Red Phantom. And so I spent quite a bit of time researching that, trying to put together a list of potential agents there.
How did that go for you?
Yeah, it went pretty well. The resource that I used, as opposed to using library books, I used a website called Manuscript Wish List. I believe that's what it's called. It's a website for agents to go on and kind of post what type of manuscripts they're looking for. So you can go on there and do like key term searches, and it'll pull up agents. Agents will list like a short biography, and they'll tell like what kind of manuscripts they're looking for at any given particular time. And so you can do a keyword search for your genre or elements of your book, and it'll tell you what agents have at least mentioned that in their biography. Now, it could be that when you do that search, you find agents that have said, I specifically don't want this, but you can also find agents that say, this is what I'm looking for.
Do you find that that's pretty updated, or do the entries seem to be stale, or like as far as how old do you think those entries are by the agents?
It seems to be pretty up to date from what I can tell. I've wondered about that myself. Some of them do seem outdated. Some of them, they'll have an entry on the manuscript wish list website, and then when you click to go to their actual agency private website, when you get on there, it'll say like, we're not accepting unsolicited manuscripts or anything. But for the most part, everything seems pretty updated.
I guess that would be an interesting question to ask you at some point, is kind of map out what we think the day in the life of the average agent looks like in terms of what they're doing, and maybe that would give us some insight into what they're looking for or how they make decisions.
That would be interesting to know. There seems to be a pretty good variation. Some of the agents you look at, and it seems pretty professional, pretty conservative, at least in terms of business atmosphere and approach, much like larger law firm. And then some of them seem almost like freelance, even though they're affiliated with an agency. They seem to be working from home in their pajamas, things like that. So I think it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and I'm not even really sure like what the average agent's salary is or how much they make per year or anything like that.
Yeah, I have no idea. And that's something that I'm curious about too. They all seem very busy. When you go to query them, almost every one of them says, we're flooded with queries, and if we don't get back to you within 6 to 8 weeks, then assume it's a no. And I wonder if they're really getting that flooded with queries. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I have a feeling, if we've sensed that there may be some skittishness with agents, I have a feeling there's a few writers out there that are kind of bad apples, or aspiring writers that are bad apples, and we've encountered them before, that may make agents skittish or afraid of writers. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's some that specifically say, if you haven't heard from us within 6 weeks, it's a no. Do not email me and ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know.
Well, and I've used this analogy before, and I think it's applicable on there too, which is it's kind of like the dating world for a guy, trying to meet women. Some women can be kind of skittish towards men approaching them and trying to get dates and everything. But I think I've heard part of the reason for that is they'll get, a small percentage of guys that don't take no very well. And so it makes them a little bit, skittish towards guys approaching them for dates in general. And I'm sure it's probably the same way with agents. They get a few writers that go a little psycho when they're told no, and makes them a little maybe afraid of writers as a group.
Yeah, that's probably true. So for my search, I initially worked down a list of about 5 agents that looked like potential queries. And then when I really started looking into each of those more closely, that list went from 5 to 2. So at this point, I've got 2 agents that I've focused in on that I'm going to query.
What were some of the criteria that you were using to focus, to get that list down?
Well, I searched what I kind of see are some of the broader, I guess, key terms that I would affiliate with my novel, which would just be crime or thriller. And then when I pulled up the list of the agents that were interested in crime and thriller, I also looked for ones. There were some that specifically said they were looking for commercial fiction, crime fiction, but based on real life events. And I thought, okay, that's somebody that I definitely want to query, because my story, even though it's purely a novel, the original seed of the idea is based on real events. So I ended up, one of those agents is one of the ones that I ended up with. But that was kind of my process. Started off with kind of broader terms, and then I would go through and I'd read their biography and see if their biography seemed like they would be receptive to what I had written. And some of them, even though they said they were into thrillers and crime or horror, once I read their biography, it was pretty clear they weren't actually interested in me or what I had written. And so those people got marked off the list. And like I said, initially, I got it down to about 5 people. And then once I got it down to 5, I went and I looked at their social media to see what kind of stuff they're posting on social media about their turnaround times, how respectful they are of the people who are querying them. Looked at their agency website to see kind of what their approaches of their business, just all those things. And once I did that, I pretty quickly was able to eliminate 3 of those people as people that, no, they're not going to be interested in me or what I've written. And so now I'm left with 2 that I think are probably pretty good targets for me to query.
Okay, well, here's a question for you. To get those 2 agents, how many hours do you think you spent getting it down to those 2 agents? Do you know?
If I had to guess, I'd say maybe 5 to 8 hours, maybe a day, a half a day to a full day.
So about 4 hours per agent on average.
Yeah, but that's starting with the website, doing the queries, reading through like an initial huge list of agents that came through on those initial query terms, right, and then sorting through those and eliminating. Yeah. So by the time it was all said and done, probably close to a day.
I'm just curious if what the rates are to get, per agent, to get an agent. I didn't keep track of that myself. I'd be curious now to know that. I'm guessing over time you develop a methodology and it gets faster and faster.
Well, yeah, maybe, but I think a lot of it's still just legwork. And I don't think there's really any way to get around, at least for my approach, I don't think there's any way to get around doing that research. I don't really want to send out to agents that I don't think I have much of a chance with, because I feel like with as much time as it takes to put together a query and all of the specific things that we've talked about before that each individual agent wants, tailored to them, it's a pretty good time and labor investment to get a query ready to go to an agent. And if I really don't think that it's going to work out, I'm not going to spend my resources there. Right. And so I've been kind of putting my resources into the front end of it and trying to refine that search. So I'll talk a little bit about the things that the agents are looking for, the ones that I'm working on my submissions for. And both of these agents, and I think probably almost all agents now, but both of these agents just want submissions through email. And one of them was very simple. She just wants a query letter and 1 to 2 chapters of your work.
Wow.
And then she said, but if no response in 2 months, it's a no, and don't contact me. And then the other one, kind of the same situation. She wanted very clear. She had like a 4-part criteria laid out, like this is how I want the email submission submitted and formatted. And it was, she breaks it down to exactly what she wants. But this agent, and both of them were female, by the way, and both of these agents wanted a query letter. The second one, she wanted actual back cover content, which is kind of handy because before, when we were talking about elevator pitch, when I originally worked up, I thought I was working towards an elevator pitch. I ended up with what sounded more like back cover content. That's going to come in handy because this agent actually wants your back cover blurb, and then she wants an author bio and first 10 pages of your work. And when they say the first 10 pages of your work, I assume that that's just kind of an arbitrary number. And if maybe you need 11 pages to get to the end of the chapter, you can just go ahead and send them 11 pages. I hope that's true, but kind of operating on that premise.
I mean, they can always stop reading after 10 if that's what they want. So I don't think it'll hurt you.
Surely not. But one other thing I wanted to talk about on this agent search that I did, at least on this resource that I use, this manuscript wish list website, there's a lot of talk within the publishing industry about underrepresented groups. And the one that you always hear mentioned the most is women are underrepresented in publishing. And I thought it was interesting, on the homepage of this website, there's a banner, a scrolling banner across the top that I guess has their featured agents, or the agents that are most active or have most recently updated their profiles. Not sure how they get on that banner, but there's a scrolling banner at the top. And so I just watched that, and there was 32 agents on that scrolling banner. Of those 32 agents, 30 were female and only 2 were male.
Yeah, I was going to say, are they saying women are an underrepresented group in agents, or are they saying in writers?
Well, they just say in publishing. And so I guess that's open to some interpretation. I'm not really sure. I don't know if they mean that the biggest sellers tend to be male or what have you. But the publishing industry and the agent aspect of publishing is very heavily skewed female. Like I said, just that one website alone, and this is not an exclusive resource by any means. I think manuscript wishlist website is pretty widely used. You've got a 30-to-2 female to male ratio there. And within that 30 female group, now I will say the 2 males were 2 white males. Within that 30 female group, though, 11 of the 30 were racial or ethnic minority. And then 16 of those specifically were requesting LGBTQ. I keep looking down at my notes. 16 of the 30 specifically requested LGBTQ fiction. And so this kind of goes to what we were talking about kind of the slant or the prerogative of a lot of agents. And so of the 5 that I initially picked, and then the 2 that I narrowed down to, none of those came from that home screen banner of featured agents. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting because they talk about the groups that are underrepresented in writing, and they make it sound like the publishing industry is just dominated by white males. And that's not been my experience at all to this point.
Yeah, as far as agents are concerned, as far as gender, that's not my experience either. I don't know about other, racial groups and how many members of particular racial groups you're going to find in publishing, but certainly on gender with regard to agents, that's not what I've seen either. But I think a lot of these things that they're using about underrepresented groups are code words or buzzwords that they use for various reasons, and a lot of it has to do with an ideology that, and I'm getting a little political here, but I think is, based in Marxism. And I think they think that white males have all the power, and so as a result, it doesn't matter how many females or minorities there are actually in publishing or writing. The problem is that somehow, this Marxist notion that, or this neo-Marxist notion that white males have all the power, and so it doesn't matter what the numerical numbers are. I think that would be their response to that situation, or to that criticism that you're making.
Yeah, I suppose you're probably right. I did, just for shits and giggles, I did a search on there for conservative, just to see if there were any agents that said they were specifically looking for fiction from conservative perspective. Now, I will say again, the Red Phantom is not in any way a political novel, but I was just curious, just my own curiosity. There were only a couple, and in that entire website, there's hundreds of agents. Only a couple hit on conservative, and when I pulled them up, they were both like, I don't want conservative fiction. And one of them even had an entry, or maybe a couple of them, that actually mentioned conservative writing. They would go so far as to say that conservative fiction is not a genre. There is no genre for conservative fiction, and if you're conservative and you're looking to publish conservative fiction, then you're basically being overtly political and almost like you're being confrontational or aggressive, and they don't want that. They don't want to see that. And so it's kind of interesting. And then going to something that you had said when we discussed this before about how kind of the left-wing perspective tends to be the baseline, and fish not knowing they're in the fishbowl type scenario. And I did a search for progressive as well to see how many agents might have specifically mentioned they wanted progressive slanted fiction. And there was probably half a dozen or so that said that they wanted fiction with a progressive view, or where they might frame it in, I'm looking for true crime, or I guess that wouldn't be a novel, but I'm looking for a crime thriller novel from a progressive perspective. And so it's not entirely clear what they mean by progressive there, but assuming that they mean in some way social justice or left wing, like I said, there's probably half a dozen of those. But they did tend to be older agents. So this kind of goes to what you were saying about the fish not knowing that they're in the fishbowl or what have you. I think a lot of the older people recognize the difference in perspective, whether it's progressive or conservative, and they specifically would request progressive fiction. But the younger agents did not have that distinction at all. They would list a series of genres that they were looking for, which all are progressive by nature.
What they believe is just common sense.
Right. Yeah, but yeah,
it's not ideology, it's just common sense.
Right. Yeah, and it's clear that was the prerogative. And you could, like I said, you could see the difference even between the older, more progressive agents versus the younger progressives. So just some interesting observation there while doing my research.
Yeah, and the stuff I write, especially what I've been writing recently, is more political. I don't consider myself really to be a conservative, but and it depends on how you define right wing. But yeah, most people would probably describe me as right wing, and what I write is on the right wing. And so it is somewhat of an issue for me, especially with Matriarchs. It's going to be an issue, and I definitely get into political issues, and it's a very political book, so that probably will be a problem for me.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of agents that are looking for matriarchal type fiction, but I don't think they're looking for your
yeah, I don't think
brand.
It's my Matriarchs. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. There was a lot of agents that were looking for women's fiction, which it's interesting that women's fiction or LGBTQ fiction or progressive fiction seem to be acceptable genres, or at least indicators for what agents want. But then they're quick to say that there really is no such thing as conservative fiction. And if you label yourself as a writer of conservative fiction, then you're basically a provocateur.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. And again, it just seems it's not going to affect what I do here, but it does kind of send up some warning signals in my brain, just considering other things that I've published in the past and how well that's going to be received.
Well, maybe there's a market there as a result of that.
Yeah, there may be. We may have to go find it and tap it ourselves, though, which
Maybe.
is kind of what's happened in the past. So we'll see. But I'm just getting started on this search, and there's the internal optimist in me that wants to believe that if the fiction is good and the story is compelling, then the agents won't hold it against me.
Well, yeah, with you, like you said, I've read parts of The Red Phantom, and it's not political. I mean, it's just a good story. And so even if you have personal viewpoints that may deviate from the publishing norm, I would be hopeful that they're just going to look at the story.
Yeah, there's a preference towards marginalized groups when it comes to like what agents are looking for. They're always looking for LGBTQ or underrepresented groups in publishing, like women. And so I think as far as The Red Phantom, there's no conservative ideology that comes through in the book, but it's not written from the perspective of a marginalized protagonist, and it's not written by a marginalized author. So I'm not getting any head starts there.
And I kind of wonder too, to what extent are they just saying that because they think it's expected for them to say that versus they actually care?
I think that's a good point.
It may just be a group conformity on the part of agents that they think they have to say that so that they conform to the group.
Yes, I agree with you. And there's a little bit of reading between the lines that I think has to go on in order to get to what you're talking about there. And that's basically how I ended up with the two agents that I've decided. And I'm not stopping with two. Two is just what this week's search yielded for me.
Well, and the one agent, and we were going back and forth in the week, and you sent me one agent's, I guess, webpage or something, and I was reading it, and it was like a left-wing word salad. And then B, I wasn't even sure if this guy was serious or not. And I don't know if you remember that guy, but you sent me, I guess it was his webpage, and I was just like, I'm not even sure this guy really means this. Like, it was just weird because the words he was putting together were like all the buzzwords, but after I read it, I was like, I'm not even sure what this guy's saying.
I'm not sure if he knew what he was saying.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, so this week I'm going to continue working on my agent search. I'm going to be working on these queries and these submissions per the criteria for the two that I've found, and I'm going to keep going down that path. What do you got going on this week?
This week, I will get back to recording bits of a future audio book for Matriarchs, and I'm also going to work on the back history some more and probably add some scenes to the Matriarchs and see if I can do that without completely taking the whole thing apart and having to rebuild it.
Yeah, now let me ask you a little bit more about that. So when you're working on your backstory for Matriarchs, now I've read Matriarchs, and so I think it would be interesting to know more of that backstory. But are you, I guess, at least initially in your approach to this, is it more to add content to what you've already written in the novel, or is it kind of fleshing it out for your own knowledge and your own information and helping you get a better grip on your characters and your plot?
I wanted to add in the history because I was a little bit concerned about how this world came to be. And I have to at least satisfy in my own mind that this world could realistically come to be. And so that was the main motivation for me trying to write in a little bit of this history of what's been happening from 2020 to 2060, when it's around 2060 when this story takes place, how that came to be from where we are today. And so that's why I did it. Mostly was to satisfy in my own mind that it was realistic. And then, I'm assuming a reader might ask the same question. The history I'm compiling, I'm not sure how I'm going to fit it in. I may just fit it in as like in certain chapters having like this happened in this year in this history and this year happened. And I've seen that before. And this happened in this year in history. And then like that way, the reader's kind of getting filled in a story within the story as the main novel goes along.
So are you going to continue doing the audiobook based on the manuscript that you already have? Or are you going to hold off?
That's another question. I think I'm going to continue on a little bit with the audiobook just because it was an interesting exercise to do and to hear myself speaking it. And I found that editing audio files, once I figured out how to use GarageBand and Apple, is easy enough that if I have to, I can go back in and change things and just fit it in to the overall recording. So I don't think it'll be that difficult. And I think speaking it and, doing the audiobook, like I said, it seems to add something for me, or it helps me to see how the story flows.
All right. Well, speaking of that, on my agent search, I came across an agent that was one of the agents that I'd queried for Hellbender. This guy popped back up on my list. And when I was reading his criteria, I thought that he might be somebody that I'll forward to you, and you can take a look at his stuff and see if you're interested.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, I don't know if you have anything else. I think I'm good.
I think I'm good too.
All right. Well, everybody that's watching, like, comment, subscribe. If you subscribe, leave a comment down below, and that way we'll know who you are and let us know, that you want a book, and also give us feedback or ask us any questions. We still would like to do a Q&A on here. If we get some questions from people left in the comments, then we can cover those on the next episode. So far, we hadn't really had many questions asked to do that with, but I think that would be a fun thing to do in the future if we can get there. So until we get there, have a good week.
Bye.
Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
what's going into the sausage here?
There's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.